Welcome to the deep dive. We all love that story of the hungry entrepreneur,
Oh, absolutely. The classic underdog.
right? The founder who starts with like $2 in their pocket, their back is against the wall, and they just build this absolute empire out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's a great story.
And we tell ourselves that having everything on the line, like having no resources, creates this intense laser-like focus. But cognitive science actually shows us that the exact opposite is true.
Completely the opposite, yeah. Being broke or, just being severely stressed about your resources, it literally physically destroys your brain's ability to pay attention.
Which is wild to think about.
It creates this massive drain on your cognitive bandwidth. I mean, we assume you need a stable foundation to do high-level work, yet the people who achieve the most often start with the absolute least. It's this massive contradiction.
And that paradox is exactly what we are unpacking for you today. Our mission here is to figure out how do you navigate your biggest goals when you are fundamentally lacking resources?
Right. Whether that means a lack of money, a lack of focus, or even just a total lack of motivation.
Exactly. So to do this, we are pulling from a stack of really fascinating materials. We've got profiles of 7 wildly successful entrepreneurs who started with nothing. From Ignite Spot, we're looking at a rigorously conducted academic study on the hidden psychological costs of financial strain.
That one is fascinating.
It really is. And we're also diving into some expert psychology articles that completely break down the whole myth of motivation.
Because we really want to give you a shortcut to understanding the mechanics of success here. Not, the inspirational fluff, but the literal cognitive science of how people get things done when the odds and their own biology are actively working against them.
So let's start with that cultural narrative, right? The myth and the reality of the broke founder.
Okay, yeah, let's get into it.
We have this deeply ingrained idea that a lack of capital is actually a catalyst for greatness.
Yeah.
And to be fair, there are people who absolutely embody this. Look at Damon John.
Oh, right from Shark Tank.
Exactly. Before he was investing millions, he launched the FUBU clothing brand by mortgaging his house for $100,000 with his mom.
Wow, talk about pressure.
Seriously. He turned his house into this makeshift factory, sewing these $10 hats himself, and he was doing all of this while working full-time shifts at Red Lobster just to pay the bills.
The physical exhaustion of a routine like that is just staggering. You were split between the menial labor of your shift work and then the really high-level strategic thinking required to build a brand.
With zero safety net.
Right. If one of those hats doesn't sell, you have nothing underneath you.
Or look at Kat Cole. Her story is wild. So she eventually became the group president of Faucius Brands.
They own like Cinnabon and Auntie Anne's, right?
Yeah, massive companies. But she was raised by a single mom who was feeding the whole family on a $10 a week food budget.
$10? Wow.
Yeah. By 19, Kat is waitressing at Hooters just to make ends meet. And then suddenly, the corporate office needs someone to go to Australia to open a new franchise.
And she just goes,
Well, she had never even been on an airplane. She didn't even have a passport. But she volunteers, figures it out entirely on the fly, and by 26, she's a corporate vice president.
that's incredible. She essentially just vaulted over every traditional stepping stone of corporate development. And she used sheer grit in an environment where, failure meant going back to extreme poverty.
And there are so many of these stories in the Ignite Spot list. Like Tony Maglica.
The Maglite guy, right?
Yeah. Born in the Great Depression, moved to the U.S. after World War II, speaking no English, and saved literal pennies to buy a $125 lathe machine.
Amazing.
Then you have Ursula Burns, who grew up in the NYC housing projects. She was told she had 3 strikes against her because she was black, a girl, and poor.
And she became the CEO of Xerox.
Exactly. Liz Talati froze her own salary and rented out her apartment on Airbnb to save zip-fit denim. Bert Shavitz started Bert's Bees with $200 at a craft fair in rural Maine.
It's a very consistent theme.
And Carl Berg. He repaired vending machines and worked night shifts at a hotel just to meet wealthy people, and eventually sold his real estate trust for $1.3 billion.
It's just a phenomenally compelling narrative.
It is, but I have to push back a little here. Are we just experiencing massive survivorship bias?
That is the big question.
We romanticize the hungry entrepreneur, but in reality, doesn't being broke just make you panic? If I can't pay rent next week, I am not strategizing a global supply chain.
You're hyperventilating.
Exactly. How do you actually focus on building an empire when you are literally just trying to survive?
Well, your intuition points straight to the flaw in the hungry founder myth. Because hard academic data actually shows that being broke does not magically bestow this laser focus. It literally fractures your concentration.
Which brings us to the academic study we looked at.
Right. This was conducted in 2022 in rural Odisha, India. And the researchers didn't look at tech founders or anything like that. They looked at workers who make disposable plates out of leaves for local restaurants.
Right. And the setting is crucial here, right? Because this took place during the agricultural lean season.
Exactly. So that means there is very little farming work available. These contract jobs making leaf plates are the only thing keeping these families afloat. So the financial pressure is immense.
So what did the data look like for them?
The researchers found that 71% of these workers had outstanding debt, and 86% reported being actively, constantly worried about their finances.
That's a huge mental burden.
It really is. And they are paid piece rate, meaning they get paid per plate. So every acceptable leaf plate they produce directly impacts their day-to-day survival.
So the researchers set up this experiment to see what happens to the human brain when you actually relieve some of that pressure.
Right. They took a group of these workers and they staggered their paydays. The control group just got paid at the normal time at the end of the 2-week contract.
But the treatment group got a surprise.
Exactly. They received an unexpected early cash infusion. They were paid the wages they had already earned, but 4 days early.
And what did they do with the money?
Well, the workers in that early pay group immediately went out and paid off their high-interest loans. They bought essential household items, food, soap.
Makes sense.
But here's the crazy part. The very next day, they returned to work and their productivity jumped by 6.9%.
Which is statistically huge.
Yeah.
And this is just from getting money they already knew they were going to get. The total amount didn't change, just the timing.
Just the timing. But the really fascinating part of the study isn't just that they worked faster. It's that the researchers were secretly measuring their attentiveness.
Yeah, the way they measured cognitive focus on a manual task was brilliant, because making these plates is surprisingly demanding, cognitively speaking.
It really is. You're taking irregularly shaped dried leaves and stitching them together with twigs to make a perfectly flat circle.
Right.
If your mind wanders and the shape gets warped, you have to undo your stitches, pull a leaf out, and redo it. And undoing a stitch leaves a physical mark.
That they called a double hole.
Exactly, a double hole in the leaf.
So a double hole is basically physical proof of a mental lapse. It's a recorded mistake.
Right. So the researchers secretly counted those double holes. They also tracked the total number of leaves and stitches used per plate. And the data clearly showed that the workers who had just received the cash infusion had significantly fewer double holes.
Wow.
They used fewer leaves and fewer stitches to construct a perfect plate. Their planning and their spatial awareness had literally, physically improved.
They weren't just working faster. Their brains were working clearer.
Exactly.
If you are listening to this right now and you've ever tried to prep for a major presentation at work while you are secretly worried about, like, a looming medical bill or rent, you have felt this.
Whoa, absolutely.
It's like trying to run a really heavy software program on your laptop, like exporting a massive 4K video. But 99% of your computer's RAM is being eaten up by a background app called financial anxiety.
That is the perfect analogy.
Right. Like, you can't see the app, but it's draining the battery and making the mouse lag. And for those workers in India, the early payment just forced that background app to close.
And in psychology, they actually call that background app a cognitive tax. When you are stressed about money, that worry occupies your working memory. And working memory is a finite resource.
So you literally just have less room to think.
Yes. If part of your brain is constantly running calculations on how to afford dinner, you simply have less neural bandwidth available to figure out how to stitch leaves together efficiently, or, write a pitch deck, or learn a new skill.
Okay, but wait, this raises a huge question for me.
Okay, what is it?
If those workers in the control group, the ones who hadn't been paid early, if they needed the money so badly, why couldn't they just force themselves to focus? Like, if I'm dead broke and I get paid per plate, shouldn't I just try harder?
And the researchers anticipated that exact question. They wanted to test if raw motivation could overcome the cognitive tax.
Oh, so they did a second experiment.
Yes, the piece rate test. They took another group of workers and literally doubled their pay per plate, from 2 rupees to 4 rupees.
Wow. That is a massive incentive, doubling their income overnight.
It's a huge surge in motivation. And it did work to an extent. Output definitely went up because the workers were highly motivated to earn that extra money. They were physically moving their hands faster.
But what about the mistakes?
That's the crucial finding. Their attentiveness index did not improve at all.
So they were moving faster, but making the exact same amount of mistakes. The double holes stayed exactly the same.
Exactly. And this illustrates a really vital psychological divide between effort and automatic attention.
Okay, break that down for me.
So effort is under your conscious, voluntary control. You can tell your hands to move faster, you can grip your tools harder, you can stay up 2 hours later.
Right, that's just raw willpower.
Exactly. But automatic attention, true cognitive focus, like the fluid ability to see how irregular shapes fit together seamlessly, that is not fully under your conscious control. It relies entirely on your working memory.
And the working memory is already full.
Right. If your working memory is taxed by anxiety, you cannot simply motivate your way out of it.
You can't just yell at your brain to be less anxious. You can't willpower your way to more RAM.
The biology literally doesn't allow it.
Uh,
And the researchers controlled for other variables just to be absolutely sure. Like, they checked if the cash infusion group was just eating a better breakfast with their new money.
because that would give them more physical energy.
Right, but breakfast habits didn't change at all. They also checked for the gift exchange theory.
What's that?
It's the idea that the workers were just working harder because they were grateful to the boss for paying them early.
Oh, I see. But if it was just gratitude, their productivity should have spiked the moment the boss announced the early payday.
Exactly. But it didn't. Productivity only spiked the morning after the cash was physically in their hands, the debts were paid, and the groceries were bought.
Wow.
The cognitive tax had to be literally physically lifted for their working memory to clear up.
Okay, so this brings us to the ultimate paradox of this whole deep dive. Because we have established through hard academic data that being broke actively destroys our attention.
Right.
And we've also established that simply trying harder or being highly motivated by a financial reward does not fix our focus or clear up that cognitive tax.
The RAM stays full no matter how hard you press the keys.
So how on earth did Damon John sew all those hats while working at Red Lobster? How did Cat Cole navigate international corporate expansion while living in near poverty?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. If their brains were theoretically drained of RAM by financial anxiety and pure motivation wasn't enough to fix it, how did they actually build empires?
So this is where we need a total paradigm shift in how we view the actual mechanics of success. If motivation and pure conscious effort can't beat the cognitive tax of scarcity, something else has to.
And what is that?
The answer lies in how we structure behavior. You have to replace the reliance on motivation with action and discipline.
Okay, we definitely have to unpack that.
Yeah.
Because I think we usually treat action and motivation as the exact same thing.
We do, but they aren't. And the insights we have here from Delta Psychology point out a very specific law in behavioral science, which is action precedes motivation.
Which feels completely backward to how we normally live.
Completely backward.
Yeah. We always say, oh, I need to get motivated so I can go to the gym, or I need to wait for inspiration to strike before I write this business plan. We view motivation as the fuel you need before you can start the car.
And that framework is exactly where people get trapped, especially when they are lacking resources. Delta Psychology explains that motivation is actually an outcome. It is a byproduct.
Interesting.
You have to actually do something, evaluate the result of that action, and then your brain generates the feeling of motivation to either continue or stop. The action generates the feeling, not the other way around.
So if you wait for motivation to strike when your brain is heavily burdened by the cognitive tax of being broke,
You will wait forever.
because the motivation isn't coming, your working memory is too full to process it anyway.
Exactly. There's actually a brilliant point in the Delta piece about decision paralysis. You know, that feeling of sheer overwhelm when you have too much on your plate.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
They suggest that if you are stuck deciding between two options and you just can't find the clarity or the motivation to choose, you should literally just pick one randomly.
Really? Just guess.
Yeah, because if it's that hard to choose, it means the options are of equal weight anyway. One isn't objectively better than the other, so the agonizing deliberation is just wasting your precious working memory.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Picking one forces the action, which then generates the momentum.
Exactly. And this connects really deeply to the work of Eric Partaker. He's an executive coach who works with CEOs. His entire philosophy is built on discipline versus motivation.
How does he define the difference?
He argues that motivation is essentially just an emotional state. And like all emotions, happiness, anger, sadness, it inevitably fades.
Right. You watch an inspiring video and feel totally fired up.
But then 3 days later, when it's pouring rain and your alarm goes off at 5 a.m., that emotional spark is completely gone.
So motivation is basically just the starter motor in your car.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like it gets the engine turning, it makes a lot of noise, and it feels really powerful. But it's not meant to power the entire road trip. If you try to drive 300 miles on just the starter motor, you'll burn it out immediately.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
Discipline is the actual engine. You don't need to feel excited about the scenery. You just need to put the car in drive and press the pedal.
And Partaker illustrates this beautifully with how he wrote his book, The Three Alarms. He didn't wait for inspiration to strike. He didn't rely on, feeling like a writer.
What did he do?
He committed to 90 minutes of writing a day, Monday through Friday, regardless of how uninspired, tired, or stressed he felt. He made a non-negotiable appointment with himself.
He just sat in the chair. But wait, why does that work on a neurological level? If your brain is exhausted, how does forcing yourself to sit in a chair bypass that cognitive tax we saw with the leaf plate workers?
This is where the neuroscience of discipline becomes absolutely fascinating. When you rely on motivation or willpower, you are using your prefrontal cortex.
Okay.
That's the part of the brain responsible for complex decision-making and executive function. And that is the exact same part of the brain that is drained by financial anxiety and stress.
So that's the RAM.
Yes. But when you use discipline to create a rigid routine like writing at 8 a.m. for 90 minutes no matter what, you actually transition that behavior out of the prefrontal cortex.
And into a different part of the brain.
Exactly, into the basal ganglia, which is the part of the brain that handles automatic habits.
So by making the action a non-negotiable rule, you basically stop making a daily decision about it. You literally move the task to a part of the brain that requires less working memory.
You completely bypass the cognitive tax. Partaker points out that discipline actually creates freedom. By locking in your actions, you remove the burden of choice.
Wow.
You don't have to wake up and debate with yourself if you feel like writing or if you feel like working on your startup. That internal debate is what eats up your RAM.
Right.
By making the action automatic, you free up the exact brain power that poverty, stress, or anxiety is trying to steal.
It's like you're putting your daily actions on a secure offline server that the anxiety malware just simply cannot access. You just execute.
Exactly. And Partaker talks about the psychological byproduct of this, which he calls identity change.
Identity change.
Yeah, when you repeatedly do what you say you're gonna do, especially when it's boring or difficult, you fundamentally alter your self-perception. You build self-trust.
You prove it to yourself.
Right. You begin to see yourself not as someone who just hopes to succeed, but as someone who consistently does hard things. Motivation might get a CEO through an exciting product launch, but that ingrained identity of discipline is what gets them through a recession, a restructure, or a really brutal week of customer complaints.
That completely reframes how Kat Cole and Damon John built their empires. They didn't succeed because they magically didn't feel the panic of being broke.
No, not at all.
They didn't have some superhuman supply of working memory that defied cognitive science. They succeeded because they substituted the lack of optimal conditions with relentless disciplined action.
They stitched the hats, they got on the plane, they worked the shifts at Red Lobster.
Even while the anxiety app was running in the background, draining their battery.
They didn't wait for the pristine launch pad. They started building the rocket while they were falling out of the sky.
Man. So what does this actually mean for you, the listener, who is trying to navigate your own goals right now? It means you have to stop waiting. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need a perfectly clear mind. You don't need a trust fund. And you certainly don't need a sudden burst of divine inspiration to start that project, to apply for that job, or to build that business.
The sources we reviewed today sum this up with a really blunt, powerful imperative. Do it tired. Do it broke. Do it anyway.
I love that.
Yeah.
The temporary pain of discipline is always going to be cheaper than the permanent pain of regret.
Always.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. We constantly trick ourselves into thinking we need to clear our plates before we can start the hard work.
We do it all the time.
We tell ourselves, I just need to get this funding secured first, or I need to catch up on sleep, or I need to wait for my anxiety to settle down, and then I'll start. But what if the very act of starting is the only way to actually clear your mind?
That's a powerful shift.
Right. What if taking action isn't the reward for having a clear head, but the actual biological cure for a chaotic one? Stop waiting for the RAM to clear. Put the car in drive and let the engine do the work. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.